Look, going through a breakup is brutal. It's emotionally draining. The absolute last thing you need is a letter from the government about a tax system that doesn't even exist anymore, demanding money you had no idea you owed. It's confusing, it's stressful, and believe me, it happens a lot more than you'd think. So the relationship's over. You're trying to sort out your life, figure out your new normal, but in all that chaos, did you ever stop to think about that joint tax credit claim you used to share? Because that one loose end can turn into a massive financial headache down the road.
Okay, let's get into it. This is a pretty complex topic, so to make sure we get this exactly right, this entire guide has been put together by the experts over at ProTax Accountant. They live and breathe this stuff, so they're going to help us cut through the confusion and get you the clarity you need.
So here's our game plan. First, we'll look at why this old, outdated system is still causing so many problems today. Then we'll walk through the really crucial stuff, what you needed to tell the government, how to prove your new situation, and how to avoid that dreaded overpayment trap. And stick with me because we'll also cover how you can challenge a debt you think is unfair and figure out what your next step should be.
Right, let's set the scene. We're talking about the old tax credit system. For the government, it's the end of an era. But for a lot of people, it's the beginning of a whole new headache.
To really get what's going on, you have to understand the timeline. As of April 2025, the tax credit system was officially shut down. Everything new is now handled through universal credit. So you're probably thinking, why are we even talking about this? Well, it's because HMRC, that's His Majesty's Revenue and Customs, is still wading through a huge backlog of old claims. And that means joint claims from years ago are only now getting looked at, creating brand new, unexpected debts for people today.
And that's really the heart of the matter, isn't it? The system might be gone, but the financial mess it left behind is very, very real. If you've separated from a partner recently, you could get a letter out of the blue about an overpayment on a claim you made together ages ago. This isn't some old story. It's happening to people right now. So you might be wondering, how could this have been avoided in the first place? Well, it all comes down to one single, absolutely crucial first step: letting HMRC know what was going on. This is the million-dollar question. The moment your living situation changed, a clock started ticking. The whole tax credit system was built on having up-to-date information, and a separation is about as big a change as it gets. You see, under that old system, there were certain life changes you were legally required to report, and usually you only had a month to do it. Splitting up was obviously the big one, but it also included things like moving in with a new partner, a death in the couple, or even one of you going abroad for a long time. Not reporting these things quickly is, without a doubt, the #1 reason these overpayment debts pop up. Okay, here's a pro tip, and honestly, this could be an absolute lifesaver. If you did call HMRC back then to tell them you'd split up, any notes you took are now worth their weight in gold. The date, the time, who you spoke to, that information could be the key piece of evidence you need to prove you did everything by the book. But it's not as simple as just making a phone call. And this, right here, is where a lot of people get tripped up. It wasn't enough to just tell HMRC you'd separated. You had to be able to prove it. See, HMRC wants to see cold, hard proof that you are financially and domestically separate. Official legal documents, like for a separation or divorce, are obviously the gold standard. But just as important are the everyday things like council tax or utility bills that are only in your name. A new tenancy agreement, bank statements that show you're no longer financially linked. These are the kinds of documents that tell the official story that your life as a couple has ended. Now let's get to the real heart of the issue, the overpayment trap. This is how a small delay from years ago can spiral into a very real, very stressful debt today. First off, what even is a tax credit overpayment? Well, put simply, it just means you got paid more money than you were actually meant to get. It was a massive flaw in the old system, which often made payments based on old info, making these kinds of overpayments almost inevitable for some people. Let's make this crystal clear with an example. Meet Sarah. She's a freelance designer living in London. She and her partner split up. In the middle of all the chaos of moving and sorting their lives out, they just forgot to tell HMRC for a few months. All that time, the joint tax credit payments kept landing in the bank account, just as if they were still a couple. That delay is the classic trigger for a nasty overpayment letter. But hang on, stay with me, because this next part might just surprise you. Just because HMRC says you owe them money, it doesn't always mean you have to pay back every single penny. There's a way to fight back. The solution here is something called notional offsetting. I know, it sounds super technical, but the idea is actually pretty simple.
It's basically where HMRC goes back and works out what you would have gotten as a single person during that period of delay. Then they subtract that amount from the overpayment you got as a couple. It's their way of saying, okay, the joint claim was wrong, but you probably should have been getting some support. So let's jump back to Sarah. A few months later, a letter lands on her doormat. It says her old joint claim was overpaid by £3,000. Wow. I mean, that's a terrifying letter to open, right? But Sarah knows her stuff, and she asks for notional offsetting. So HMRC looks at her income as a single person for those few months. They calculate that if she'd made a single claim right away, she would have been entitled to £2,200. And just like that, look at the difference. They take the single person amount away from the joint overpayment. Her debt is no longer £3,000, it's $800. Now, it's still a debt, but it's a whole lot less scary.
But, and this is absolutely critical, so listen up, there's been a big change. Since April 2025, HMRC has brought in a strict 3-month deadline to ask for this. That clock starts ticking from the date on your final award notice. If you miss that window, you could be on the hook for the full amount.
Okay, so what if you've done all that and you've used notional offsetting, but you still feel the debt you're left with isn't fair? Well, the good news is you have the right to challenge HMRC's decision. Let's look at how. You have two main tools here, an appeal and a dispute. It is so important you know the difference because the deadlines are tight. Think of it like this. An appeal is when you think they got the maths wrong, a calculation error. You only get 30 days for that. A dispute is when you think the whole decision is unfair. You're arguing it was HMRC's mistake and it's not reasonable for them to ask for the money back. You get 3 months for that one. The dispute process is all about responsibility. You're basically building a case. First, you have to show you did your part. You reported the change on time, you gave them the right info. Then you argue that HMRC messed up. Maybe they took way too long to update your records, or an advisor on the phone gave you bad advice. You lay all this out on a form called TC-846, and if they agree they were at fault, they can actually wipe the debt clean. Phew, we have covered a lot of ground, haven't we? So let's pull all of this together and talk about the practical steps you can take to move forward from here with a bit of confidence.
All right, if you remember nothing else from this discussion, remember these 5 things. 1, act fast. The moment things change, tell HMRC. 2, get your paperwork in order. Gather all the proof you need to show you're single. 3, never forget to ask for notional offsetting, and remember that new 3-month deadline. 4, know your rights. Understand the difference between an appeal for bad maths and a dispute for a bad decision. And finally, number 5, you do not have to figure this out on your own. And of course, we have to mention this. All the information we've talked about is for general guidance. Your situation is unique, and for advice that's tailored specifically to you, it's always best to speak to a qualified expert.
And that brings us right back to the experts who helped put all this together. If you're facing one of these tax credit overpayments or you have any other tax questions nagging at you, the absolute best next step is to get some clear, personalized advice. You can contact the team at Pro Tax Accountant directly. You can get them on WhatsApp or by phone at 07985-689912, or just drop them an email at info@protaxaccountant.co.uk. They'll help you navigate all this with confidence.